Hello, everyone. Now it's past 2 o'clock, so I would like to get started. If people can take their seats, please. So thank you very much for coming out. It's good to see some old acquaintances. Thank you very much for coming out, everyone. It's good to see old acquaintances and friends, colleagues from years past. Today's speaker is David Phillips. David was employed with Environment Canada Weather Service for over 57 years. In 2024, he transitioned from senior climatologist to climatologist emeritus. His work, he says that dropping senior from his title immediately made him feel younger. His work's activities relate to the study of climate of Canada and to promote awareness and understanding of meteorology. He authored several books, papers, and reports, including the book on the climates of Canada, the 2 bestsellers, The Day Niagara Falls Ran Dry and Blame It on the Weather. He was the originator and author of the Canadian Weather Trivia Calendar. David frequently appears on national radio and television as a commentator on weather and climate matters. He has been awarded the commemorative medal for the 125th anniversary of the Confederation of Canada, the Queen Elizabeth Golden and Diamond Jubilee medals, and has twice received the Public Service Merit Award. David is the recipient of 3 honorary doctorates from the University of Waterloo, Windsor, and Nipissing University. In 2011, David was named to the Order of Canada. On a personal note, I met David on a meteorologist course long time ago in the 70s. He came to give us lectures on climatology, and somehow those lectures sort of stuck with me because I spent 30 years in climate research. So you did a good job teaching us climatology, David. David has unique talent of explaining complex atmospheric phenomena in simplified terms, but also make it interesting and entertaining at the same time. So be it the nuclear winter, remember that in the 70s, those of us who are old enough to remember that, or ozone hole, or acid rain, or climate change. You know, he has talked about all of those things and explained it very, very well. So I wouldn't be far off when I say that David is a legend, really a legend in Canadian weather and climate-related topics. Congratulations, David, on your stellar career. So today, we're going to see some light at the end of the tunnel of climate change, and the title is After 50 Years, Finding Hope in the Climate Crisis. David?
I did. You check it though, okay? Volume, okay. Well, Amir, thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. Not only what the notes I sent him, but he obviously did some more research, and I love that personal touch. Thank you, Amir, so much. Well, it's good to be back. I spent 50 years of my career at 4905 Dufferin Street. I participated in many events in this particular room. I've heard a prime minister speak. I've heard governor generals speak. And I've heard scientists with Nobel Prize winning scientists and other great Canadians. I've spoken to seniors and students and staff about a variety of subjects. I remember once emceeing a fashion show for the United Way in this room. And I also have given or performed a number of skits in at retirement parties in this very room. As I've said, this is home to me. In all, I've spent 57 and a half years with the Meteorological Service of Canada. And I joined the service 9 months before Pierre Trudeau became our 15th Prime Minister. And I retired 9 months before his son retired as our 23rd Prime Minister. Of course, that was before some of you were even born when I came to this service. And when I joined, I didn't really want the job. My hope was to become a teacher, and ever since grade 4. And I had a job lined up to be a teacher. But joining the MSC back there when it was the Department of Transport, Meteorological Branch, environment hadn't even been thought of, was a chance to come to Toronto. And for somebody, I know that's not a big attraction nowadays, but back then, for somebody from Windsor, it was the big deal. My first job was with the doing research on the Great Lakes and also marine areas in Canada, looking for places that one could build, for example, in Atlantic Canada, a super tanker oil port. Later, I became an applied climatologist. I loved that job, trying to show people the worth and the value and the utility of spent meteorological observations, how you could turn data into information so that people could make greater profits or make their life maybe more comfortable or easier or safer. Eventually, I assumed the role of the senior climatologist, and today I have an emeritus status. With Environment Canada, I only applied on a job once, and I was declared unqualified for that job. You know, I had to, over the years, create my own job. And I had great managers who let me do what they thought I did best. And so I'm very grateful for that. Throughout my career, I've talked to thousands and thousands of Canadians, from Goobies, Newfoundland, to Yo-Yo, British Columbia, to Kugluktuk, Nunavut, in church halls and among the pews and curling rinks and opera houses and schools and a cow barn in Ridgetown to a saloon on the Alaska Highway. And throughout that, and also, of course, in broadcast studios, I've tried to answer people's questions about the weather. I've heard complaints about forecasts and tried to teach a little meteorology along the way. If the truth be known, though, I'm more of a story teller than a scientist. I've had in my collection over 30,000 weather stories, from before Jacques Cartier was around to yesterday morning. I keep compiling weather. I did that on purpose. Thank you. I want them to look at me, not my slides. So I have also compiled lots of little trivia, like did you know, or gee wow whiz, or is that true, you know? And it was stuff that, you know, kind of didn't save the world, but it made you a hit at your next wine and cheese party or your barbecue. And things like, did you know that men are hit 4 times more often by lightning than women? Now, we like to think we're magnetic, but I think we're stupider, actually. Or the average sneeze has the same force as a Category 2 hurricane. Gives you a lot more respect for a good gesundheit when you hear one, you say. Or that female-named hurricanes kill twice as many people as male-named hurricanes. You know, when you have a hurricane like Igor and Ivan and Attila and Adolf, I mean, it strikes fear in your heart. You're going to board up your house and follow that evacuation route. But what about a hurricane named Debbie or Patty? I mean, it doesn't strike fear in my heart. I think if we named female hurricanes, Zelda or Gertrude or Broomhilda, then we probably wouldn't see as many deaths. Now, I use stories to connect with the audience. I call it edutainment. I think that in order to educate, you have to educate. And so it's like a snake oil salesman. Comes into town with that particular thing he's going to sell, but he does a song and dance ahead to build up the fever pitch and then gives them the big sale, you see. So I kind of use that approach to reaching Canadians about the weather. But when I speak to Canadians, I don't talk about Toronto weather stories. They want to hear about their own misery, their own hardship, how they have saw and survived, that the pioneer spirit still burns, that people who scoff at blizzards and sneer at frostbite. Let me tell you a couple of stories. Not Toronto stories, but 4905 Dufferin stories. April 1975. This was the year that Canada went metric on April the 1st, at least with temperature, went from Celsius or from Fahrenheit to Celsius. And the vast majority of Canadians were not accepting or very pleased by that change. In fact, they created the longest petition in Canadian history that stretched 3.5 miles. I told them they'd be more impressive if they said 5.6 kilometers, you say. But anyways, it was a big deal. Well, the next day, on April the 2nd, it started snowing in Toronto. And not downtown, here at Dufferin. And after 60 hours, we had anywhere from 25 to 35 centimeters of snow that fell in the area. And of course, April 1st is when the snow contract removals end. The graders are taken, or the blades are taken off the snow plows. And the only way you can get rid of that snow is to melt it. And of course, the vast majority of Canadians thought this was the weather gods taking revenge on the Meteorological Service for metrication. But it was pretty bad. Out there on Dufferin, everything just came to a stop. Or Dufferin buses pulled out, and the passengers would get out and come into our building seeking shelter and comfort overnight. Yeah, overnight. The staff were told by management, well, if you feel that there is risk to life and limb, you can go home at 3 o'clock. Good luck. It'd been snowing for 30 hours. You couldn't see the parking lot. And the cars were just jammed at the exits or the entrances of the parking lot. People knew they were going to spend the night in the building. They couldn't phone home because the bell lines were jammed. They played cards. I think movies were piped into the classrooms. And of course, you could make sandwiches until the food ran out in the cafeteria. But the real wise people were the ones that went around and grabbed all the room dividers they could find, because this was the only way you could sleep on these at night. And this was more comfortable than sitting at your desk. 20 years ago, April the 19th, 2005, there was an announcement of the PA system. All the employees come to the auditorium immediately, because Toronto was under a tornado warning. And we did get 2 EF2 tornadoes, one in Kitchener and one in Oshawa. But in Toronto, it was just rain and more rain, hail and lightning and winds. It was quite a miserable kind of a moment. And certainly at the little weather station just outside here, 135 millimeters of rain that day, over 100 in 1 hour, even more than what fell during Hurricane Hazel. And the water came into the first floor, filled the wind tunnel and the warehouses, and started coming up the floor. And it was quite a moment. There on Steeles, just east of Dufferin, the water rose 1 to 2 meters high. And over there on Finch, west of Centennial, the roadway gave 30 meters of road disappeared and wasn't repaired until the following year. Now, I didn't come here today to tell you about famous weather stories. Instead, what I wanted to do was to raise your concern about the real and growing threat of climate change. And I want to try something different today. I'm always kind of a crepe hanger when it comes to what we need to do about climate change. So I'm looking for, some hope, some optimism that perhaps maybe we can wrestle this thing to the ground. And it is something that has been with us since, David Suzuki said 40 years ago, this is the most important environmental issue that humankind has ever faced. And he reiterated that to me last September when we both spoke at the Seniors for Climate Conference in Toronto. Now, when I joined the service a long time ago, climate change was occurring. It always does. Sometimes it just changes a little faster than other times. But the climate was considered to be stable and static and dependable. Summers were hot and winters were cold. 100-year storms occurred every 100 years. I mean, nowadays, I don't know how many storms of a century you lived through. I've counted 3 in my lifetime, and I'm not finished yet. Canadians used to think that these things occurred on the other side of the planet to a society different than ours, in Bangladesh and Botswana and Bolivia. And now they're occurring in Burlington and Brandon and Burnaby in our own country. And weather back then was at least seemed to be not more predictable, but more foreseeable, more manageable. 50 years ago, nobody wanted to become a climatologist unless you were a forecaster on shift work. And then you accepted the ridicule of becoming a climatologist. I was a climatologist before it was fashionable to be called a climatologist. And for most meteorologists, being a climatologist was like a terminal position. It was like being a lighthouse keeper. As my mentor, Ken Hare, said, if you ever wanted to be elected to the Royal Society, you never announced yourself as a climatologist. Times have changed. I get young people now writing to me and phoning and wanting to know what is the path to becoming a climatologist. Not a forecaster, not a tornado chaser, but a climatologist. And over my career, one of the most remarkable changes that I have seen is the high regard and respect that scientists have for climatologists. And, back then, my gosh, half a century ago, climatologists were talking about the causes of the last ice age. Climatology was a descriptive, geographically based subject. People wanted to know, what is the average snowfall in Toronto in a normal year? And if you have a little bit more information, and the range maybe, or the variation from year to year. And is that the normal, the 30-year average, what they were asking? And can you grow peaches in Kapuskasing? These were the burning issues for climatologists at that time. It was, as I say, largely descriptive and geographically based. You wrote regional climatographies. First book I ever wrote was The Climate of the Great Lakes Basin. I was a traditionalist. And then at the end of the 1970s, climatology came of age. It was rooted in the foundation of mathematics and physics. The global climate system became not just including the atmosphere, but it included the oceans and the biosphere and the cryosphere, and it was truly the planetary climate system, probably as complicated as the workings of the human body, but it was together. Climate modeling was possible on the invention or the development of supercomputers. Climate journals came of age and became very, very prosperous. And climate departments in universities sprang up, not just part of geography or meteorology, but on their own. And conferences by learned societies were held for climatology, the World Climate Conference. One of my greatest thrills always have been the fact that the Department of the Environment became Environment and Climate Change Canada. So even the politicians saw the way clear. Canadian Jim Bruce said it best when he said, climatology was too important to be left to the climatologist. I thought, how cruel is that? But how true it was. And I had the great privilege in June of 1988 to be part of the Changing Atmosphere Conference in Toronto, that last week of June of 1988. And I had been seconded for about a year and a half to help plan and execute that particular program, or along with several others from the Weather Service. It was the first international conference bringing science and policy together for the first time, and it was deemed a huge success. It just kind of unfolded as had been planned. Prime Minister came to speak. We had ambassadors from environment from all over the world, secretaries of state, and the who's who of science and economics and policy meeting in the same room in the Congress Center in downtown Toronto. And grappling with that big complex issue is about environmental protection and economic growth are not mutually exclusive goals. And so it was considered to be successful. And what really made it successful was the weather. My advice, never hold a climate conference in January or February. I've been to some that have been canceled because it's been too cold or snowy. This one was held during a bristling heat wave that just gripped North America, deadly heat wave, and a terrible drought that was one of the worst ever. So, the media, the public were convinced that climate change was here. They didn't have to be convinced or argued otherwise. They were actually told that it was, or they could see it themselves, and that, cities that were broiling and baking, and that was because of human activity, not anything else. At the same time, the climatologist guru James Hansen spoke to Congress in the United States, and he said he was 99% sure that climate change, that global warming from a human activity had arrived. So in the 1980s, climate change burst into the public consciousness. We saw global warming was rebranded to be climate change. Global media interest in climate grew tenfold in one decade. And Canadians started talking about climate change. Not just climatologists to climatologists, but Canadians to Canadians were talking about it. Ordinary Canadians. They appeared interested and somewhat concerned, but they'd always say, well, maybe a little bit of warming is a good thing when you live in the second coldest country in the world and the snowiest. And they felt it was distant and abstract and futuristic, yes, and they were probably more concerned about the barbecue on the weekend, but they still were talking about it. They were engaged with it. It was not something that was left to climatologists to discuss. And so this was to tell you that, hey, what was wrong with a little bit of warming or cooling? So I got ahead of my slides. But in the 1990s, Canadians thought it was a real thing, but it was an Arctic thing. It was a northern thing. It was about the fact that the ice was beginning to melt in the Arctic, that icebergs were appearing, calving from ice caps from Greenland and Ellesmere Island and Baffin Island and other Arctic islands. It was a place where you couldn't build ice roads anymore. The permafrost was melting, and polar bears were skinnier because of this warming, this runaway warming that was occurring in the Arctic. You know, at that time, when I began my career, they discovered oil in Alaska. And I remember going down to the third floor of this building and talking to the ice observers. They were all excited because they were going to board the Manhattan, this huge, gigantic super tanker. And it was 10.5 football fields long. And it was going to go up from the eastern Canadian coast up through the Northwest Passage to Alaska, take a cargo and come back through those ice-infested waters. And they chose to come at the end of, in August and early September, when the ice is the thinnest, the weakest, and it will be easy. They went out there, the super tanker, with 4 icebreakers, and they got stuck. And the icebreakers broke up the ice, and the Manhattan would back up and then crash through the ice. Eventually, it made it to Alaska, picked up a barrel of crude oil, and brought it back through the ice-infested waters. But they realized that you can't do it this way. We have to pipe it out, but not through super tankers. Nowadays, 45 years later, there are more cruise ships in the Arctic than there are icebreakers. And it shows you what, even in a generation, how it can change. For the first time in history, human beings became aware of the changing climate while it was changing, not after the fact. Climate was no longer entirely the work of natural forces. It was a product of our economy, our way of life, and our habits. Climate change had not yet been connected to extreme weather. That was to come. But for me, it was about that time, 1996, with the Saguenay flood, our first $1 billion weather-related disaster. This was not the traditional kind of Canadian flood with ice jamming and river and snow melting. This was in July of 1996. More water fell on the Saguenay that weekend than would flow over Niagara Falls in 2 months. And then came the next year was the Red River flood, the flood of floods. It was 28,000 Manitobans were evacuated because of that flood. It was the Red River became the Red Sea. I remember the pilot said as we were flying into Winnipeg, he said, look out the window, any window, and you'll see the water from horizon to horizon. Well, that was the Winnipeg flood, Red River flood. And then in 1998 came the ice storm from hell, from Kingston to the Bay of Fundy. I mean, more wire and cable came down than would stretch around the world 3 times. And for Montreal and Ottawa, people remember even today, 27 years later, what they didn't have for breakfast those 5 days in January. There were more insurance claims that's not the cost, but the number of claims than any other, 750,000, than any other geophysical event on planet Earth to that time. Nowadays, of course, it's easier to create weather. Storms seem to be juicier. There's to have more moisture associated with them. It rains harder. I mean, it's still our grandparents' weather. It's not as if it's like typhoons in Toronto and monsoons in Montreal. It's still the same weather, I mean, I wish it was that. That would be easier to probably explain to people what's happened. It's still, you know, storms are just bigger and badder and more impactful. They're out of season, out of place. They're larger, more frequent, and they're more cascading. Not just hail balls, but strong winds when the hail's blowing. Or in the Atlantic coast, it's not only just big Atlantic storms, but hey, higher sea levels that are causing more inundation when these storms hit. But there's also something else that is happening to the weather. It's got more variable, more what we call wild swings in the Joker deck, more like weather 180, more flip-flops, the Jekyll and Hyde kind of personality. I mean, I've had farmers say to me, I'll say to them, well, do you remember the wettest season you ever had? Yeah, that was, I think it was in 1956. And what about the driest? Well, I think it was 1901. Now I get farmers saying to me, I could have bought drought insurance and flood insurance in the same growing season. It's incredible how these are back to back. It's like normal doesn't occur anymore. Normal is expect the unexpected. And we do everything based on normal. We build hospitals, go on vacations, plant trees, and do everything. I mean, you wouldn't build California-style homes in Toronto. You build them based on Toronto's characteristics. And so, but that seems to be the big economic problem, a big concern is that variability. I saw a research paper yesterday from NASA that talked about, yes, the fact that there's clear evidence from satellite, is it Grace, I believe, that said the number of droughts and floods has gone up in the last several years, and dramatically, you can show it. But what they're saying, though, which I thought was interesting, is this sudden transitioning between drought and flood or cold and hot or vice versa is causing more harm than just if they were on their own. And so it's that combination that is really a concern. And no region is kind of left unattended. It doesn't matter whether you're province or territory or urban or rural or north-south. And things have really started taking off in the last decade. And for thousands of Canadians in the South, in the provinces, they're seeing in their own backyard, in their own neighborhood, their own parts of communities are left as a wasteland because of what they thought was a northern thing. And in 2021 was the big year. It was absolutely, for me, it was the epiphany of it all. We saw in Canada, we were just absolutely bombarded with everything you could imagine, particularly British Columbia. And it started with the heat dome, this dome that stretched from the Arctic Circle to California, but totally affected Alberta and British Columbia in a serious way. I mean, we broke records. The record stood for 80 some years in Yellowgrass, Saskatchewan, 45 degrees. It was now 50 degrees. Little Lytton, British Columbia broke the record on Tuesday. It broke the record that stood one day on Wednesday, broke it again on Thursday, and Friday it burnt down. I mean, it was absolutely, but then what was even worse was that, you know, when 3 people die from a heat wave in Canada, you have a royal commission set up. Back then, it's hard for me to say it, but 70 Albertans and 620 British Columbians died in that punishing heat wave. In next year, in 2022, well, we had Fiona, one of the most devastating, destructive, and costliest hurricanes ever. Here in Ontario, we had remember the derecho that came on the long weekend in May on that Saturday from Windsor to Ottawa over to Quebec City, and just mowed down millions of trees, some century-old trees, cost $1 billion in insurance loss, and took out power for 1 million people and some for several days. But it was like just a Saturday afternoon event. And so we've had our share. And then in 2023, in that storm, there were 11 people that died from trees falling on them in that May Saturday long weekend. In 2023, the Canadian landscape was really hit hard in terms of, burnt tree stumps and debris piles and smoke and haze. I mean, 2023 was a big fire year. What struck me were the number of evacuations. I've never been evacuated because of the weather. I can't imagine the horror and the stress, the anguish that you have when you're uprooted from your home and taken maybe 1,000 kilometers away, or 2,000, like people in Yellowknife when they went to Winnipeg, and kids are playing video games and going to the movies, and you're sitting there wondering if your property and possessions are going to be intact when you return. Some people had to be evacuated twice, one for floods, one for fires, and sometimes twice for fires. It was an awful, awful year. And of course, what we saw were a record number of fires. I remember on June the 6th, there were out of control fires in every province and territory except Prince Edward Island and Nunavut. But it was everywhere. It was national. And that was one of the hard things about it. It wasn't just one part of the country. It was from coast to coast to almost coast. And few Canadians saw the flames, but millions smelt the smoke. And so did they in the United States. Here was the front page of the New York Post saying, blame Canada. The Americans couldn't believe. Here is where the air is scrubbed and polished, and now they were being fumigated by Canadian air, as they were in Europe. And then we came to 2024. The insurance industry said that this was the most expensive, 2024, the most expensive year on record. Used to be $400 million damage, kind of a $400 million damage in an average year. This was $8.5 billion. And most of that occurred in 1 month, from the early July to the middle of August. And of course, it's remembered by the Jasper fire. There is Jasper. Jasper knows how to handle fires. It's probably the most forest fire protected town in Canada. They have sprinkler systems. They have fire retardant roofs. They have cut down all the trees around the town. So when the fires come, they're starved because there's no wood to burn, you say. And yet it burned a quarter of the town down. And 24,000 people had to get out of town within tourists within a day, hours, and 5,000 residents. And then, of course, in Calgary, we had an enormous ice storm, a hailstorm on August the 6th. It was August the 5th. It was a nice summer in Calgary, a little warm for Calgarians maybe, and precipitation was a little higher than normal. But it was a 20-minute storm that defined that summer. It was that hailstorm. I know it's Hailstorm Alley, but this was really expensive. $3.5 billion of property. It damaged 1 in 5 homes and wrote off 77,000 cars in Halifax. And of course, for us, it was the summer of the big flood in Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto. Montreal had 2 remnants of tropical storms, the wettest months ever that they had put in. And Toronto, I mean, we had the wettest season ever, the wettest month ever, July, and the wettest day ever, August the 17th. I mean, Don Valley Parkway was submerged on several occasions, and in Union Station, the water flowed down the stairways like they were waterfalls. So what we've seen in the last few years, it's impossible for us to ignore and to forget. Rare events have become, more frequent. Extraordinary has become the ordinary. Extreme weather events have become more extreme. And all this self-inflicted misery, because the world has warmed up by 1.5 degrees in the last 150 years. What's it going to be like when it warms up by 3 degrees in 30 years? And what scientists have warned about 30 years ago has come to pass. I know, I was there. I heard it. And the prediction for the 2020s is coming. No, you get maybe ocean levels right, but everything else was pretty well on tap. And so we are, in fact, living the forecast that was made. We're constantly being bombarded with bad news about climate change. Horrifying news. And and just listen to what people who are meant to inspire us have said about climate change. The former executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention, Patricia Espinosa. We have 2 years left to save the planet. Now, granted, she said that 10 years ago. And then Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General. The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has begun. If that doesn't scare you enough, he says climate change is irreversible. Humanity has opened the gates to hell. And Greta Thunberg, I mean, she is said to worried young people, I want you to panic about climate change. And then, of course, we have Donald Trump and his campaign against climate change. In his first term of office, it took President Trump 35 months for the US to get out of the Paris Accord. And that Paris Accord was sort of our kind of humankind's sort of last hope to wrestle it to the ground. When Biden put them back in, it took Trump 35 minutes on his second term to get out of the Paris Accord. And this was a month after cities and towns near Los Angeles were burning to the ground. So the Americans went from together we can save the world to drill, baby, drill. And in a host of executive orders, Trump has ramped up domestic oil and gas production to a sector that donated $75 million to his campaign. He has declared open season on endangered species. And he has rejected decades of warnings from eminent scientists who have no axe to grind. And he has called their work dangerous fiction and referred to climate change as a huge hoax and the largest scam perpetrated on humankind. He's slashed NOAA and NASA budgets to the core. He's gutted their research program. And well, you can cancel climate change science, but it doesn't cancel climate change. And so no wonder young people feel abandoned and hopeless and helpless and confused and scared and angry. I mean, I have read about physicians and teachers and parents talking about children losing sleep or having nightmares or panic attacks because of what's going on. And the highly respected journal Lancet did a survey of 10,000 young people in 10 countries and found that 60% of them were very worried about climate change and felt that, even a third of them said, I don't even know whether I'm going to have a family in the future and in a world that is under a climate crisis. Well, there are things that give me hope, though. And let's become more positive now. I've been enough of a crepe hanger, and let's look at what I think are some of the hopeful signs. Well, first and foremost, I think hope comes from the recognition and acceptance of climate change as being evidence-based science. You can't get scientists to agree on anything, but 98% of scientists believe that the world is warming up faster and greater now than it has in a long time, and human DNA is all over it. We know that climate change science is solid and strong. What we knew 30 years ago, we know now. We're just kind of fine-tuning it. It's not as if it's been reversed in terms of what's happening. Temperature trends have been upward and outward everywhere, from the tips of mountains to the depths of boreholes. And yes, there's uncertainty, but there always is with science. Just because we don't know everything doesn't mean we should ignore what we do know about it. And further, natural factors such as volcanism and solar and the sun and the oceans, indeed, cannot explain the kind of warming that we see on planet Earth. And we should have gone, if you took all the natural factors and plugged them in, we should have been going through modest cooling in the last 35 years, not runaway warming. So there is no kind of convincing explanation other than the fact that it's human activity. Not an overactive sun, it's us. Where it's coming out is our tailpipes and smokestacks. That's where the problem is. Furthermore, I think we're hopeful because we know what the solution is. You know, it's not some geoengineering kind of approach where you get up there to the stratosphere and you eject little mirrors to reflect the sun and cool off the earth. It's not Donald Trump's solution to hurricanes in the Gulf of America, where you nuke them or you spread vegetable oil on the oceans to diffuse them. We know the science. We don't have to wait for it. It's here. We just have to do it. I think another reason that gives me great hope is the development and the advancement made in attribution science. You know, this came out of the question, did climate change cause that storm? Did it cause that weather happening to be like it is, you say? And, you know, the skeptics knew that the answer was no, and they were right. You can't say that just that alone solely caused the storm of a century or it to be what it is. We know that weather is created by a multitude of factors. The oceans, the El Nino, La Nina, the sun, the other various teleconnections that exist on planet Earth. And so the better question to ask was, did climate change make that extreme worse than it would have been? And attribution science is able to answer that question by looking at models based from supercomputers of the situation before human beings got into the picture, in terms of atmospheric loading and land use changes. And then looking at it now and saying the difference gives you a sense of what is the human contribution to that particular weather. And so it's made a difference with communities to find out where they know now what they're maybe at risk at and what they can do to perhaps mitigate it. And we're seeing also court cases are being settled now. You didn't throw them out because, well, you couldn't determine what the human factor was. Now you can put a number on it, a percentage on it. And so we're seeing more success in the courtrooms. I think another hopeful development is that climate change is become part of our public conversation. The media have embraced it to a big deal. I remember when the media would say, well, could you come on air and talk about this latest development from a climate science point of view? Now, we're also going to have somebody who's a non-believer, and because we feel that it should be the fair and balanced approach. It's the American-Canadian approach, equal time to opposing sides. So it makes for maybe interesting television. But what it did was to invite the seeds of doubt, confusion, and uncertainty. And consequently, no action was taken. And understandably, the public said, okay, you know, science is still working on this. This is unsolved science. It's still science in action. So why would we take action when we don't know what the science is, you say? And the petrochemical sector was delighted. I mean, their idea was distract and delay and deflect and carry on. And that's clearly what was a big issue. I think another hopeful sign is what's taken place in the boardrooms and in corporate Canada. We have seen CEOs and CFOs that have said climate change is a real threat to the bottom line. We have seen climate change as the biggest, for example, of the Davos conference on the World Climate or the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, that in fact the largest single impediment to world economic progress is climate change, and that has been noted for the last 10 years. Further, we have seen, good news that some jurisdictions have reported achieving lower emissions and not affecting the economics of their particular enterprise. More and more asset management companies and large investors like universities and banks are divesting themselves of petro industry, particularly the coal industry. And banks, till I read something today which disappointed me, but banks have actually refused to lend to oil and gas projects. That was decided in 2021, but I see last year there were $430 billion where banks invested in companies extracting oil and gas. Another reason for hope is the action of young people. Young people are engaged, and they're saying that they don't want more talk, they want more action. Action gives them hope. And not more science necessarily. I mean, that was always one way of deflecting action, is just pour more money into science. Let them do more science. Well, they feel the science has been solved, and we now need more action. Another hopeful sign, I think, is clean energy. Clean energy around the world has become, unstoppable. In the past decade, the cost of wind energy has gone down by 70% and solar by 90%. And the first time that renewables energy plus nuclear has generated more than 40% of society's needs in electricity. It's projected that sometime this year, renewables will replace coal as the main driver of electricity generation. We still have a ways to go, of course, because electricity only accounts for about 25% of society's demands for oil and gas. But you see progress made even in cutting back on emissions. Look at European Union. They're 31% lower emissions now than they were decades before, and they've made money from it. Even the United States, 7% less than they were in the 1990s. I don't know what the situation is before Trump became president. And even China, and the emissions in last year were the same as the year before. So that has to be a positive news. Canada, well, it's not so good. So in conclusion, let me say that climate change is the defining issue of our time. Evidence of runaway climate change is all around us in every sector and in every region. It's not just fake news, it's not just hypothetical, it's the reality today. And what irritates me are people my age, talking to people my age, and I get to talk to a lot of people of my age. And what ticks me off is I'll say, are you concerned about climate change? They'll say, well, not really, I'll be safely dead before it begins to bite deep and hard. Come on. And unfortunately, we've not started soon enough and expansive enough to make this change. And so it's going to cost more difficult and more expensive to make the changes that we need to introduce. There's a serious debate, though, in the climate movement as to what motivates people or engages people to take action against or for climate change. Do we sell climate change on hope and fear? Is it optimism or pessimism? Is it to save money for the economy, or is it to save the planet and the place we love? And saving the economy, creating better jobs and cleaner air, all of that. Probably it's both, really. It's you do whatever you can to move people along to the right direction. I love farmers. I speak to a lot of farm groups, food producers and farm business people. I think it's because I'm cheap, you know, I come and free to them and chat with them. And, you know, they don't believe everything I say, farmers, but they are very respectful and they're very polite. And I'm optimistic when I drive around country Canada and I see the wind farms and the solar panels that measuring many thousands of hectares in various communities. But I know it's not that farmers want to save the planet. I know it's not because they love the soil. It's not that they're into regenerative farming like never before, or they save that barrel of oil and go green because they are environmental doobies, good doobies, you say. They want to save a dollar in a business that's very marginal, that's critical to them. And so they know that sooner or later, governments are going to mandate that they make these changes, that their customers are going to demand it, and their competition is already doing it. So as good business people, they're moving, but whatever motivates them, hey, that's all right. Sometimes it's the little things that motivate me in terms of the hope for climate change. I mean, I read just 2 weeks ago that the largest owner of solar installations, panels, installation in Canada are public utilities. And the second largest owner are Indigenous communities. And I'm optimistic because I believe in the human condition. Maybe I'm a little simple, but I believe we will do the right thing. Our motivations for doing something about climate change is based not on what we've seen, it's based on what we're going to see over the years to come. And this is not really a fight against climate change. It's really, rather, it's showing us how we can live better with the climate we've got and the climate we're going to get. It's good to be back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was very enlightening, all the way from the beginning to the current time where we are in the climate change scenario. So I would like to go to the online people first. Is it possible to see if they have any questions for David? Jen, can we? Questions? Okay, well, we'll take some questions from the audience here first.
Here.
About 40 years ago, when I was working here, we did a fair amount of work on wind energy. And since then, Environment Canada seems to have played a pretty low role in terms of renewable energy. Is there any hope that they will start to get more involved in forecasting wind and solar power?
Well, I'm not the person to ask. I'm retired. I don't know what the plans are. I mean, I think that certainly one hopes that they carry on the good work that they did in the past. But hey, I mean, times and demands have changed and directions come different from different head office. So I really don't. There's maybe others that could offer a comment, but no, I'm sorry, Peter. I'm lost to know. I don't know what the current plans are.
Just a comment, David. I always love and appreciate your talks. So this one, fantastic as always. Just a question to you, hypothetically, if you had a magic climate change wand and you could go anywhere back in your career over the last 50 years, at any point in time, in any place in the world, what would you say would be the one thing that you want to change that would make the biggest difference to help us with climate change? At any time, at any place. And you had a magic wand.
Well, I never very quick on my feet. That's a tough one. You know, in the years that I've been here, people have said, well, you know, has there been, and I shouldn't even talk this way about political parties, but is there a party that was maybe more green than another one? And I really haven't found that. I could say that I could find fault with or good things that were about every administration. I mean, they often say that Mulroney was the greenest prime minister we ever had. And I can certainly, he was part of the Changing Atmosphere Conference, and you know, one could make a claim for that. I think my greatest wish, though, and I think that it seems unfair of the chemical industry, the gas and oil industry, the people who extract fuel from the ground, and how what they're given in subsidies and tax breaks compared to the renewables. And I think at a fair, you know, just a level playing field where both were dealing with the same economic possibilities, then I think that would only be fair. It's so one-sided, even today, even with banks not loaning, but we know there are a lot of hidden subsidies and advantages to that industry, and for some good reason. But hey, I think if the same advantages were given to the solar and the wind and the renewables generally, even not just that I think it would be easier to see how it could happen. I think it would be a better world. I think it would be fair. People would see the true economic cost and value of that, because we know that it's a lot less expensive to install a renewable energy site than it is to do an oil and gas site. So we clearly know it. So that would be my wish from an action point of view. But, you know, I think that's the climate change. The problem is if there was a place you could go to escape it, and we can't. I mean, we saw what's happened to the Arctic, to our own area. There's no safe havens for climate change. And any period, well, I mean, you have to sort of also say there's been so many advances in terms of the science of climate and meteorology that, you know, you wouldn't want to go back to the good old days. I mean, it's easy for somebody to say, well, gee, it'd be good to go back to the good old days. But in fact, you know, we're doing more with less and less data, and we're creating more data. We're not just observing it. We see that. So yeah, I think, you know, it's a tough question for me, and I'm going to reflect on it for the next week. And hey, I'm going to write to you with my better answer that when I've had some time to think about it.
Bob, you had a question?
I just wanted to respond to Peter's comment there. If you go to the CMC data mart, there's grid files and CDF files of high resolution forecasts of wind and solar radiation at the surface that's available for at least the next several days. Now, it's not tailored and promoted to help the renewable energy sector, but certainly the technology is there to support the renewable energy sector. So, but it could use some promotion, some tailoring, we think.
Yeah, I was not aware of that, so that's useful.
We have a question online.
So there are some questions online, if I can read them.
For the benefit of the journalists and the audience, can you provide links to supporting materials for all the ways that Canadian weather has changed so that we might review them?
What is that? Where's that? I didn't get the question. Where is it here?
Yeah, it's there.
Which one?
You can read this one here.
For the benefit of the journalists and the bad, can you provide links to supporting materials for all the ways the weather has changed so that we might review them? Wow, it's a good question. And again, I'm a little out of touch. I've been sort of retired since September. and I'm not up to date on really the business or the workings of the Meteorological Service of Canada. The question was, for the benefit of the journalists and the audience, can you provide links to supporting materials for all the ways the weather has changed so that we might review them? Well, I think that it's a loaded question, how the different ways the weather has changed. I'm not sure that I know if there is such a source, because you could define that in so many different ways, by region or by element or however. But it's, again, I'm sorry, I can't provide you in some insight as to the best Jim Dandy kind of website to get that. I mean, we have a wealth of information available in Environment Canada, and I'm sure that that you could, by just going there or talking to, and you know, maybe it's a matter of phoning you know, communications or somebody in the service who could help you steer through that, stick a handle through all of the different sources. As Bob sort of mentioned, there was a source that wasn't necessarily known by somebody who's actively engaged in that particular field of research. So I think there are a lot of unfinished symphonies out there and a lot of hidden gems that can certainly be uncovered. But I don't think there is one site or one location I could give you to steer you there. I think it's a matter of you getting into the service and finding somebody that could help you out, and then going through the many areas that you could find could open eyes to you about that.
Another comment here from Gordon McBain, who says we need to introduce action to build climate resilient
communities. Yeah, I mean, Gordon is still very active, I'm pleased to say, in the climate change community and in communications and science, and he certainly knows firsthand of how important it is to build up our resilient communities. I think for so long we have given so much emphasis to the reduction of fossil fuels, and that's important. And so little of our resources have gone to adapting to the kind of changes that we've seen. I've seen some figures that it's almost like 10% of the effort and the money spent to cut back on fossil fuels, only 10% of that amount has been spent in resilient, building resilient communities. And I know when I talk to mayors and councillors that it's often, they're doing the right thing. It's not often those things are communicated in a clearinghouse way to what are the good practices that are being done in different communities across the country. So people are learning these things and not just discovering them on their own. And so I certainly think that we need to build through examples. We need to give incentives. And I think it's such an easy thing to sell. I mean, I often say to mayors and councillors that, you know, the actions you take in building a better and safer and more weatherproof community is good for the community. It makes your community more attractive to development, to people coming to live there. It makes property values higher to say that, okay, I've weatherproofed my property. And I always have said to audiences when I speak to them, you know, you can't expect the federal government and the provincial government to bail you out every time Mother Nature misbehaves. You know, it's going to stop with you. It's going to be your property, your neighborhood, your small community that's going to have to take the action to build up a more resilient community. And so I think it's just one of these things that has to continue to happen. It's just that they have been so far left behind, that side of the solution to climate change. And I think one point I wanted to raise, I did in my talk, was the importance of the insurance industry. I often said that the insurance industry, when they got involved in the climate change issue, that you really saw things take off. It was almost like governments didn't believe scientists, their own employers. But as soon as the insurers said that this is important to the bottom line, we're seeing more of this, and we've got the proof, the data is there in our records, that it became clear that this was not just scientists looking for more research monies, but this was actually happening on the in Canada at the community level. And so I think insurers have really helped to push the agenda to make Canadians and the government more aware of the urgency of trying to do something about climate change. And again, it's the adaptation side has been woefully underfunded and ignored, and that really has to change.
Okay, another question is, from my audience here is what I heard. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Numerous statement claims the weather has changed, but an inability to cite a single reference to any of those changes.
Which question are you referring to here? Could you help me find it, because I couldn't hear.
Yeah, this one here.
So the question I see is that, please correct me if wrong, numerous statements and claims the weather has changed, but an inability to cite a single reference to any of those changes.
Maybe you could just add to the websites there, changingclimate.ca /CCCR 2019. So there is in Canada a national assessment process for assessing changes in climate. And for the first time out of that process in 2019, there was a major comprehensive science assessment report that assessed changes in climate in the past and in the future. And all that information is delivered in one place on changingclimate.ca. So instead of a multitude of references, somebody can just type in changingclimate.ca /CCCR 2019. It's Canada's Changing Climate Report 2019. And Environment Canada, in collaboration with a lot of other folks across universities and governments, are in the midst of producing a second Canada-wide science assessment of changes in climate. So there's a multitude of references in that report, but that would be one place to go to. And then climatedata.ca, which is the portal to the Canadian public that the Canadian Centre for Climate Services uses, would be another good website to go to get information. So I would say those two things. And I did have a question, which was just, because you go out there talking to people a lot, and you talked about different framing of, how to talk to people about the problem of climate change. Is it, do you talk to them about the, the economic benefits of taking action? Do you alarm them, by the worry about the changes in extreme events? Do you talk about opportunities with green energy and cleaner air and opportunities for new jobs? And there's so many different ways to frame the problem. So I just wondered whether there's probably no single answer, but have you found that some ways of framing the problem are more effective than others, or some resonate more with particular audiences than others? Just wondered if you could share your thoughts on that.
Well, Elizabeth asked, say, if I give a lot of talks to different groups, and what angle do I take? Is it one of almost scaring them or giving them hope or what have you? And really, I would say up to recently, it's been one of trying to, I try to go through the science and what we know and what we don't know and what's being done, sort of the advances. I try to illustrate to audiences what would the models say the near future is going to be, and out to the end of this century. So give a sense of, hey, what is the forecast going to be in the near future and beyond? And then, of course, what we can do about it. And what we do about it, I think, is one that it's a bit troubling. I try to, again, talk about the fact that it's the small communities, the groups that have to be engaged and make their, the insurance industry told me once that a visit to Home Depot for 3 weekends in the summer, and you could probably eliminate 45% of the flood dangers around your home. So there are a lot of things we can do around the home to kind of weatherproof our possessions against climate change. But really, Elizabeth, I base it betting on the audience. If it's a community group, I focus on their community and what they have dealt with in terms of extremes of weather and what could possibly come in the near future. I give them a weather forecast for what it would be like in 2030 or 2050, something like that. And and so it really depends on the group. If it is a more scientific group, then I'll use more those arguments. But if it's a group that is more environmental, more maybe wildlife, then a lot of the examples will be from that sector. So I try to tailor my talk to the audience and not just give them the same old spiel. And they use the examples from weather or from impacts. I mean, there's so many, it's going to affect everybody. So you try to zero in on what they can take out of that and get from it. But I try to give hope. I try to get more and more saying, you know, hey, I mean, we've done a lot and we've got a lot more to do, and that certainly Canada is going to be affected. And you know, there are some benefits. I mean, there's no denying it. There are some benefits when you live in a cold country like Canada. There are clearly benefits to having a warmer times. And for agriculture, for example, they could come out to be a big winner. I know economists have said that Canada could be a superpower with regards to agriculture in the future. But it's a matter of doing things differently than your parents did. If you look at it now and approaching things with that information in mind, then I think you can take advantage of the situation. So again, it depends on the group and the circumstance, the city. Sometimes if you're talking out west, you might have a slightly different approach than if you're talking to people here in Ontario or Quebec, but hey, it varies. But I try to more and more work in more of the hope and the fact that this is not doom and gloom, that there is some can come from that. I know in the climate circles, there's a lot of debate as whether you try to say to people, this is like the end of the world. This is your children that are going to be, your grandchildren are going to be affected by this in a very serious way. Or do you try to avoid that and give hope? And surprisingly, a lot of the social scientists have said that creating fear in people is more motivating than just giving them hope.
Okay. I think it's past 3.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do is, I know there are a lot of other questions that will come up from people online. So what I suggest is that you send me those questions and I'll pass that on to David. Is that okay? Because it seems that there are over 100 people online and they have a lot of questions. So what I'd like to do is to thank David very much for coming out all the way here and giving us a rundown on the complete changes that are happening to our climate. So now there's refreshment outside, and please help yourself to some refreshments outside. And David will be here to chat with you for a little while. Thank you.